Hello, love. I'm Ashley Miley, and this is the Sacred Intimacy Temple, a podcast exploring love, sex, and relationships as a sacred spiritual path. Each episode is a remembrance of sacred intimacy, first with yourself, and then with Source, your beloved, family, and community. Come home to the temple within. Let's begin. Welcome back. It is lovely to join you here today for the second episode of the Sacred Intimacy Temple podcast, kind of launch binge series, if you will, coming home to intimacy. And so, what are we going to be exploring today? Because I've talked about with this series that we're really going to be first exploring like what has sort of made us forget this natural innate path of intimacy. And so that's kind of a part of what we're going to dive into today. Exploring that is kind of a two-parter. So this is the first part. And really, we're going to be looking at this from more of a layer or a level of the mind. So what are the ways that we've been taught to be? What are the beliefs that we have? Because underneath that is this influence of also the body and how this shows up in the body. And a big piece that shows us why we've disconnected from this innate ability to relate is because we're living in the mind. We have so deeply, for most of us, disconnected from our bodies, and for good reason. But we're living in the mind. And yes, of course, in relationship, to have a beautiful, healthy relationship of any kind, communication is key. And we use our words and we use our mind to communicate. But at the same time, really think about it for a moment. I believe the statistic about it is that 80%, maybe even a little bit higher, of how we're communicating in relationship is nonverbal. So it is the way that our body posture is. It is the way our face expresses things as we speak. It is the tone of our voice. It's even what part of our body we are speaking from. That actually has a lot higher influence on our relationships than the exact words we use. Doesn't mean that, the words aren't important by any means, because they are. But it's if we are living from the mind, a lot of us, well, what have we been taught about relationships? How have you been conditioned into relationships from this sort of space that's thinking about it and analyzing it, has certain beliefs and all that? And really, in that we were taught to never love, in a way, is kind of the name of this episode and how I look at it. When you think about, for us, and many of us existing in Western culture or being heavily influenced by Western culture, that kind of society, what has it taught us about intimacy? One, it has taught us not to value it, really. What is more important than intimacy in Western society is power, is money, is being an individual, our sense of individualism, our sense of our achievement, our accolades, ours. And again, there's a high importance in this whole kind of path that we are connected to ourselves and related to ourselves. But again, self-intimacy, as I like to call it, is very different than these are my achievements and these are my accolades and this is what I know and blah, 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 whatever it is for you. And something I think about a lot, and this is my personal thread of connection to this, and I'm just going to put some good money on this, that I am not the only one. But, a lot of us learned somewhere along the way that we might actually only get love when we achieve, or when we're really smart, or when we've earned a lot of money, or you've done the big important things. And this could be something as simple as your parents would celebrate you and reward you when you got an A on a test versus a B plus. And maybe sometimes even when you got that B plus, you were shamed. And it's what kind of household this is. We only blah, 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 blah. And think about that. If you had that kind of experience and you're able to sort of recall, what was that experience of the times you got that A plus or A versus when you got a B+. Sometimes, for some of us, I know this was true for me, like, no matter however we did, it didn't really matter, but teachers made it really important to do well. And teachers would praise, and then you'd like go home and like there was no response to how you did. So in some ways it didn't matter, but sometimes there's also that like hot and coldness of like sometimes they'd be responsive, sometimes they wouldn't. But all of it to be said is like I think a lot of us carry this idea that love and connection and intimacy comes from doing things. It comes from a transaction almost. And so there's kind of this idea that it's like if I do the right things, which is like have high achievements, make a lot of money, have a lot of power, to whatever that sort of looks like in your sphere of the world, it's like then I would that actually like then I get love, then I get connection. And that really comes from an idea of like your achievement and your accomplishments makes you enough and worthy and valuable so that then you get love and acceptance and connection and belonging. You know, there's also a part to this where it's like you get connection, love, and belonging when you, in essence, like fawn or people please, when you follow the status quo. Even if everything in you is calling in a different way. You're like, nope, got to do it this way. But again, like even if you follow that, which I resonate with this, like, do you actually feel love and belonging? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. And all this to be said, like, we don't value in our society, we do not value relationship. We do not value intimacy. There's like components, I think, even of like shaming of intimacy in relationships. Because we do know that like on a biological level, there is a need for connection. There is a need for attachment. It is part of our survival mechanism, if you will. But there's so much that pushes it away or makes it feel like this goal we have to accomplish. And that again comes back to the sort of like, we got to do all this stuff first before we could have it. And that even shows up in relationship as like, if we think that we have to earn our way to relationship, earn our way to intimacy, love, connection, belonging, it then also shows up in the relational sort of field of like, this is where we have relationships that are very much built on the transaction of needs. So it's like, I'm not coming into relationship because I'm whole and able to meet myself. I'm coming into relationship because you are going to give me this and you're going to do this for me. And then in return, I'm going to give you this. And it becomes a transaction. And this way of like, we have to even then prove to each other, like, I deserve for my needs to get met because I met your needs. And again, that just becomes a whole field of like resentment and anger and frustration and all of that sort of stuff. And there's a lot even deeper layers to it than that, because it's like, are we even like communicating our needs and desires and things like that? Well, have we even really like, have we asked the person if they want to do that? Do they have the capacity? Like there's all kinds of layers to this. But in just a simplistic form, like we have learned that we have to prove ourselves and earn intimacy, that it is not an innate thing. It is not a given thing. And I'm also in recognition, I'm making a bit more of a large generalization. So not everyone falls into this, but I do think that a lot of us experience it this way. Or there's like threads of this that we experience. And so when we think about, for example, thinking about like intimacy being something that we earn, that we have to prove, like we have to prove our enoughness and our lovability and our worthiness through our achievements, through our doing, like think about some of the common sort of stories that we understand about relationship or are taught to us. So, or even think about like if intimacy is not something that's valued, what kind of stories then do we develop? So one thing I think about is like a lot of people think that intimacy just like happens. And like, you know, once that it's that sort of initial spark, that chemistry kind of thing, like once it's there forever. No. Intimacy, it goes through seasons just like we do as humans. Intimacy grows just like we do as individual humans. It requires maintenance. It requires tending to. It requires skill building. It requires learning new things. It requires meeting hard edges. So I sometimes like to think about intimacy in that way. And it doesn't sound as like sexy when you put it this way, but like, like intimacy is like going to the gym. It's like being healthy, you know, like you can't just eat one, I don't know, like one salad and be like, oh, I'm healthy for a lifetime. I am good. You can't just go to the gym once and be like, one, I'm healthy, but two, like, you know, even in, not again, not to kind of equate this to achievement, but let's say, you know, you wanted to be able to like squat 400 pounds. Most of us are not going to be able to go into the gym and off the bat be able to squat 400 pounds. It's going to be a journey to get there. It's going to take time. We're going to have to learn new things. We're going to go through challenging seasons where our body's like, you know what, I need rest or whatever it may be. And intimacy is the exact same thing. It is not just this like thing that happens once and then it stands forever. It is something that you constantly need to give into and offer yourself to and be willing to stretch yourself for. But if we were to actually acknowledge that, it would take away from the like achievements and the power and the money and all that sort of stuff and the focus on that. Another way that some of these ideas show up is like sometimes like, and I think many of us can relate to this. I know I can, like we go into relationship as performance or with manipulation. So performance could be seen as sort of that people pleasing, that fawning of just like, oh, if I know that my partner really likes only sort of like kinky or BDSM sex, and I hate that shit, but I want their validation. I want their love. Maybe even I have a degree of dependency on like that person financially provides for me. And I know the only way to keep them here is if I give them this. We perform. And even that in itself then becomes manipulation. Even if it's like, you know, we can look at something like, and we know this about women and the evolution of women. And if we look at the evolution of relationship over time, like there was a threshold of time where women could not make their own money. They really did have a dependency on men to financially provide for them. And so if they were to leave a partnership, for example, they would have to either like find another man or figure out how they were going to be able to make money. And that was a real survival kind of idea. And there are still plenty of women that struggle with that when it's like they are in a toxic relationship or something and they have to figure out, I can't financially provide for myself, or I haven't done that, or whatever it might be. I have these children, and it creates another degree of financial, you know, need. And it's like, I've actually got to address that. That's a real thing. So because of that, because it's a little bit easier, we can stay in relationship, but we're performing and we're manipulating to get our needs met. Even if those needs are really like, we need money in our capitalistic society to have food, to have a home, to have clothes. And even if it's just that simple, let alone like we perform and we manipulate because we have wounding where it's like, I need that person's validation. I need them to find me attractive. I need them to like me and love me. And I will be whatever they want me to be to get that. Because there's something inside of me that is not knowing of my lovability, my worthiness, my beauty, my radiance of just like exactly as who I am. We can also see that, again, because we don't really understand the work in a way that intimacy requires, there are, of course, people that have had the beautiful gift of growing up in really beautiful homes where they're able to develop secure attachment. For many of us, often we're carrying insecure attachment, whether that is like fearful, avoidant, anxious, or avoidant attachment styles. And so when you're someone who carries an insecure attachment, like me, and for many of you listening, and then you're like, you know, you see this like beautiful relationship. And first and foremost, I just want to present the thought that because especially of social media, like you can see a relationship and it can look beautiful and great. And you're like, wow, like how do they do that? And for all we fucking know, like who knows what's happening behind closed doors? That's just a piece I'd like to offer. But two, like, you know, like there are people who have secure attachment, and those people tend to find each other and then they have very healthy relationships. And so it can look like only some people get to have like beautiful relationships and intimacy. They get to have it, but I don't. I know I resonate with this story. And it's like, no, like, I think the thing I want to say is like, yes, intimacy requires work, but the gift of that is that it's malleable. It's not this fixated thing. Just like the way that we think, the way that we see the world, our nervous system is not a fixed thing. We have capacity to shift it. That is what neuroplasticity is about. And so we can look at intimacy the same way, like, and relationships is the same way, and sex, where it's like, maybe this is what I'm holding right now. And maybe because I've been taught I'm not allowed to like expend time and energy in this space, it feels like I can't do anything about it. I feel powerless to change it. But you can. And it's a worthwhile thing to shift. It's a worthwhile thing to invest time and energy and resource into. And you also don't need to like invest those things into it in a way of like proving that you're lovable and worthy and enough, you know? You don't have to feed into it in that way either. And I think one other story that is very prevalent in society based on sort of our conditioning and the way that we look at intimacy is like finding the one, thinking that there's this one perfect person out there. One, I don't believe that there's only one person out there for us. And actually, I do believe that some of us have journeys where we're supposed to have like kind of multiple significant partners. And so we're not supposed to be with someone forever. But even more deeply than that, thinking that there is a perfect person out there. And it's like, if I just wait long enough and I meet enough people, I will find the perfect person who has no problems and da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's not true. Because again, if we were to find the perfect person, for example, if we spend enough time, at least in relationship and intimacy in that way of like finding the perfect person, if I find the perfect person and they're this fixed, perfect person, that means that I don't have to expend a bunch of energy and time and resource into this relationship over the long haul, because the important thing is achievement and money and power, not connection and belonging and love and relationship. But if you can recognize that there is no perfect person, and again, even if you were to find that perfect person, there's a very high chance that somewhere along the path, that person's going to change, because again, we as individuals go through seasons. And even if it maybe takes a few seasons to kind of change, eventually all of us change in some sort of way. And that is, again, even part of the challenge of relationship is like we're changing along someone else who's changing, potentially at different times, at different moments. And sometimes when we're in the flux of that, that's where we can have these kind of components of like conflict, because we're just not attuned to that and we don't know how to work with that. But if we can acknowledge that there's not a perfect person, that someone is going to be changing while we're changing, it becomes less about finding the perfect person, which again doesn't mean that there can't be standards. It doesn't mean there can't be non-negotiables. Like, you know, for example, if you want a family, it's very important that you find a partner who wants a family too, unless that is like some sort of like fluid non-negotiable for you. But if it's non-negotiable, it's really one of those things that's like, this is not changing. And so, you know, there's certain things like that it's like, if that's something I want or want to experience, the person I find has to as well. But what becomes more important is that we find people who have capacity, who have skills, who want to lean into the opportunity of relationship and intimacy, who want to grow in that space, who want to move and grow and co-create with us, and who want to at least prioritize that enough to like bring energy and time and resource into that space, instead of only like the achievements outside, or even like being spent in the ego of like, I've got to prove myself enough and worthy and whatever. And that actually means that takes me away from this like space, this relationship that we're creating, or this family, or whatever it may be. And when you think about some of these stories, like finding the one, or kind of thinking about, you know, relationships, they just sort of like, they're only for certain people, or the idea that, you know, that chemistry happens or the attraction is there and then it's always there. Like these types of stories, we've been taught those types of stories on a much larger level because, again, they've kind of made us forget the truth of relationship and of intimacy. if we were really to believe into these things, we forget that relationship is a path, that intimacy is a path. We forget that it requires energy, attention, resource. We, kind of like check mark it off the list. Like, oh, found the relationship, it did the thing, cool. Now I, go back to the whole achievement, money, whatever kind of energy, vibes, whatever. And I think, we've been taught these certain stories and we've been conditioned into these certain ways because there's a purpose behind the forgetting. There's a purpose behind forgetting how powerful and necessary intimacy is. Think about it. I will say that when you've developed a really profound relationship with yourself, you can obviously do very grand things in your life, and you can also do grand things in your life without a relationship to yourself. They're, it's not like they have that sort of relationship in that way. But even when we're like more connected to ourselves and we're like moving through our life in more that sort of solo path for a period of time or for a season, it is very different to create life, to move through life, to be like alchemizing life than when we share it with other people. When we are witnessed, when we are heard, when we are supported, when we are celebrated by other people. There is a strength that happens when we exist in community, in relationships. And I'm sure all of you can relate to a moment of being in a relationship or being in a community space where, you're moving through something challenging, whether it was just like in that particular moment or maybe kind of more globally in your life. And you were able to move through the challenge of life with more ease, with more play or pleasure even, because you were in relationship to other people. There were other people supporting you and helping you. You weren't just having to figure it out or do it all on your own or holding it all on your own. And I think we can all think about times in life where we've been on that solo journey, if you will, whether just the season or choice or whatever. And even if you've like chosen the solo journey and you're kind of like, you know what, like I'm going to do this on my own. For example, I purposefully chose, like a period of my life, a year of my life, not to relate to the masculine, to men at all. And yes, of course, I had women in my life to relate to. But I do very particularly remember sort of in the first like kind of few months of that experience, one, I was just becoming so aware of all these things that I had been doing with the masculine, that like kind of forms of manipulation and like undertoned manipulation of like getting attention and validation and stuff. And like getting just like energy from the masculine by, again, manipulating them through myself, basically. And realizing like how I was using that to fill me, and to realize that there was something that needed to be filled that now couldn't be filled by, people outside of me, but it had to be filled by me. And again, it didn't have to only be filled by me. Eventually, like I was able to like lean into women and like have experiences of being witnessed and heard and seen and like connection that were able to kind of shift my perspective. But it was very important in those first few months that there was sort of this kind of solo full experience of like, oh, like I can't do the things I used to. I can't like go get a hit of energy from a man the way I used to, And that it was like, oh, I got to find it in me. And so as I was working with that, that was still in this sort of pandemic sort of experience. And I was contemplating different things of life, and there was just like life challenges in general. And it's like, it was really hard moving through that time. It was really hard. I mean, I did it, but it was really hard. And even to then think about, once I was able to start leaning into women in that sort of container, it made things a little bit easier. And so like when we have been disconnected from the truth that one of the things we really all agreed to when we came into this life was for intimacy and connection and relationship. And we kind of feel like we're in this like siloed like box or something where it's like, it's me. I got to do this life. This experience of it's me, I got to do this is very like disempowering in a way. We're not as strong on our own as when we are with others. And in that sort of like, it's more challenging to be on your own. You do sort of like weaken in your resiliency, in your mindset. And that is where like forces of like of greater power, if you will, can like use that to their advantage to sort of manipulate and to have like to keep their hold on power. And so, you know, think about it. Even if it's like you're trying to change something in the world, like if there's like a system that needs to be dismantled, one person fighting it is very different than like a collective trying to fight it. And people in power know that. And so that's why there's been ways that we have been disconnected from each other, because we're not as powerful when we're sort of on our own or in the illusion of on our own as when we're in community. And what also happens is when we're sort of more in that kind of weakened solo state. And again, this is a little different than like self-intimacy, but when we're in that sort of weakened solo state, we really do have a harder time tapping into our power, our truth. And those pieces I find are really important in being able to maintain resiliency and being able to move through life as it lives, you know? When we're connected to truth, when we're living in relationship to truth, when we're really like anchored in who we are and we find our sense of power from that instead of the falsification of like, my power comes through achievement or a title or money, but it's really like a genuine self-empowerment of like, this is who I am. I know how to be with myself. I know how to hold myself. I know how to move through the world as me. That's a very different kind of power. And it's hard to connect. It's hard to connect to that kind of level of power when you're in this like weakened solo state that we get conditioned into. And so in essence, like, you know, that's why I also partially say that like relationship and intimacy is sort of this next edge of human evolution, not just spiritual evolution, but human evolution of like coming back to that. Like, what would humans be capable of if we existed in community again? We used to exist in tribes. Our biology yearns for that, longs for that, seeks that. What could we co-create together if we were in communities again versus in these like silos of ourselves? What kind of power would we regain from collectiveness versus, again, like the siloed solo self? And people in power know that. And so in that way, we have been fed certain stories about relationship and connection and intimacy so that there can be this hierarchy of power. And that can be a little maybe disheartening to really like sit with. But I also think that it can be really powerful in a way to recognize that, like, for example, like it's not you. And even if you've had your own experience in your own life, for example, of like trying to prove yourself to be loved, you can realize that that story and the ways that you're still attached to that emotion or those parts or whatever, it's not so much about you as much as like you've just kind of been brought into that. Other people have been playing out that as well, that we've all sort of co-created that experience together. But it creates a degree of separation where you're like, wait a second, like that's just something I learned. Or that was something I had to do to survive. And like, thank you, self, for realizing that. Thank you, self, for leaning into that. And with a degree of space, it's enough space, and especially when you digest some of that emotional material a little bit deeper around that, you create more space. But in that space, that's where the spark of curiosity, the spark of intrigue can come and be like, wait a second, this is how I've been doing it. I get why. I have gratitude and respect for that. And that space creates agency and choice. And it's like, and now, how do I actually want to move through the world? What do I want to believe? What do I want to value? What do I want to hold as, like, hold with reverence and hold as, like, truth and hold as, like, this is what this life is about for me? And when you come into that kind of sense of empowerment in yourself, again, like that pulls it away from people who are in this sort of illusionary state of power based on kind of the structure of our society. And I think when enough people do that, when we think about some of the more global issues that are occurring in the world, and we talk about needing to dismantle systems and remove people of power, there's a lot of things that have to be done to do that, but this self-empowerment piece, if you will, is one part of it. And again, it starts with yourself in a way, and then it's like when you're in that place of empowerment with yourself, it's like, how can you move into relationship in that way? And so we can look at it as like, for example, so many of us can be in partnership and we can have a moment of conflict. Our partner can be doing something that annoys us, and we can get into that victim of like, oh, like, God, why are they still doing that one thing that annoys the fuck out of me? And it's like, but when you're in this state of empowerment, you can see that there's an opportunity to that. And only you'll know like what that opportunity is for you and for your partner. But it becomes so much more powerful to realize like everything's here to serve us. Everything's here to bring us back to truth, to bring us back to our power, to bring us back to ourselves, to bring us back to, when we think about a relationship, like the truth of that relationship, the capacity of that relationship, the magic, the potential of that relationship, or whatever it may be. And so I think one of the important things to kind of call back to mind, there's a lot of reasons why never really being taught how to love, never really learning how to value relationship and intimacy, not being taught perhaps most of the skills we need to sustain relationship, some of the just awareness around relationship, like never learning that, but being conditioned into these beliefs and these patterns, like it doesn't work because one, like we don't even have some of the foundational skills to move through relationship. But it also doesn't work, everything that I've sort of spoken through, because again, it's kind of like bringing us all up to the mind. And so then we're trying to do relationship and intimacy and connection from the mind. And the mind is like one of the most, like the conscious mind is like one of the most unpowerful parts of us in a way. The subconscious mind makes up 95% of our reality. And if we're trying to do something from the 5% of us, that, like, we're not really in our greatest influence. But again, like, we've been disconnected from the most powerful part of ourselves, which is the mind, which holds the subconscious. We've been disconnected from the body, which holds the subconscious mind. We've been disconnected from that. And we've been taught to sort of live in this like mind matrix that isn't even that powerful in the grand scheme of things. And again, like people are aware of this. And so, part of reclaiming intimacy, centering it again in society, allocating time, energy, and resource to it, understanding what it really is about. Part of how we come back to that and choose that is very simply, in some ways, like choosing to come back to the body. Choosing to recognize the wisdom that it holds, the material that it holds that needs tending and loving and attention in a way. And when we choose to do that, despite all the reasons to be disconnected from our body, which is what the next episode is going to more deeply dive into, we again step into this edge, the next edge of human evolution. We reset the frequency of the earth. And so we can use our mind in this way of like, our mind helps us make choices. And our mind can help like connect dots and things like that. And so it's like, can you make the choice to recognize, hey, this is what I've been given. This doesn't work for me anymore. I'm going to do something different. And again, making the choice is the first step. It's not like, oh, well, it's all resolved and figured out now. But when we make that choice of like, and I'm going to choose what's true for me, and I'm going to choose something different, that becomes kind of the prayer almost, if you will, that helps us slowly come back to our body. And coming back to the body is very much the first step in the path of sacred intimacy. And whether you look at it from being in relationship to yourself, being in partnership, etc., we have to come back to the body because the body is giving us so much information to work with. It is really the one that is telling us what is our yes and no. What do I really need? What do I desire? What does this need that I have, what does it look like when it's met? What is it that I really want to experience with this person? What is the energetic frequency of which I want to build a home around? Like all these types of things. That wisdom, that knowing lives in the body. Also the ways to know, like, when do I like lean into relationship and when do I lean away? Our body is the one telling us all these things, but we have been disconnected from it, so we can't hear it. We can't follow its wisdom. We've been living from the mind. The mind has been influenced by many things, and most of those things not even being to the truth of intimacy. And that in itself is why it just doesn't work. And that's a huge part of why we're here today, where intimacy, where relationships, where connection is, this, threshold of like the level of disconnection, the level of loneliness in this world. And so that's what I have to say for today. And next time, we're going to go deeper into this body piece. Like, how is the body the sort of beholder of the wisdom? How is the body the beholder of the path, your unique path of sacred intimacy, of intimacy? What disconnects us from it? And how do we, use our body as a way to choose that path? So I hope that something within this sparked something for you, a piece of awareness, maybe even just the inspiration to make a different choice. And maybe you're like, I'd like to make a different choice, but I don't even know what that choice is. And you know what? That's okay. You don't have to know right now. You don't have to know. It's powerful to just recognize you want to make a different choice and celebrate that. And again, sometimes we might hear something and it opens our awareness and we're like, oh God. Like, for example, when I realized the ways that I manipulated men for validation and attention, it was like, oh, geez, like, that's not fun. That's not cute. That's not sexy. Oh, God. Even though I was trying to be sexy, no. And it's like, oh, God. And so, like, if you're in that sort of space where maybe you heard something, you're like, oh, God, like, that really has been running my life. And, like, that's really not working for me anymore. Like, celebrate that. And even, like, be like, hey, discomfort, I see you, I feel you, I hear you. Like, I'm with you. It's okay. You didn't know better. And for many of us, as we'll explore next time, like, whatever you've been doing has a lot to do with survival, has a lot to do with just, like, giving yourself the best chance to, like, be alive. And not even realizing, maybe to some degree, that there's something beyond survival, which is thriving. And also not understanding, like, what is thriving for you? Because also, like, my definition of thriving, or what thriving looks like for me, is probably not the same for you. But many of us, survival is very, like, very black and white. It's like, you're either alive or you're dead. And so many of us have developed all kinds of patterns, especially in relationship and sex, that is built on survival. And it makes a lot of sense. And we can give ourselves a lot of compassion. And we're aware, which means there's some space to get curious and regain agency and make a new choice. So maybe that's what I just hope to leave you with, is like, what is that new choice that you can make? And again, it doesn't even have to be like, 0 to 100 choice. What is that, like, doable next choice you can make for yourself? As we're coming to the end of this episode, if something really opened up inside of you, if a piece of awareness really came through and you're like, wow, like, okay, now I'm aware of this and how can I work with this? I want to tell you about the next Intimate Step session. So the next Intimate Step session is a 75-minute one-on-one session with me designed to help you experience one shift that will transform your intimate life while initiating your unique path to deeper intimacy. In this session, we'll explore one of your intimacy challenges or a piece of awareness you came into, and through personalized body-based inquiry and an embodiment process, we will really work with and digest this challenge or this piece of awareness and really help you kind of see, like, what is that next step for me? What can I move towards next? What are, who can I anchor into to make this next choice? Things like that. So as a launch special for the beginning of this podcast, I am offering these sessions for just $60. They are normally $150, so this is an incredible deal and an awesome way to get a taste of what it's like to work one-on-one with me. And I'm also only making 16 of these sessions available. So once they're gone, they're gone. In that, these sessions are open, and they will be open either until all of them have sold out or until Sunday, April 19th at 11:59 p.m. So if you are feeling called, if something in you is like pulling you, like, yes, like I need that, like, please, you can find the link to take your next intimate step in the show notes below. And if you sign up for a session, I am so deeply grateful and so looking forward to getting to hold space with you and getting to explore your unique path of intimacy and the challenges you uniquely have on that. And again, I just want to thank you so much for joining this episode of the Sacred Intimacy Temple podcast. As always, it is a pleasure to be in space with you, to be in the temple with you, and I am sending you so much love. Thank you for walking the path with me today. If you're feeling called to go deeper, everything you need is at thesacredintimacytemple.com. Join the community there to stay connected and be the first to know about new episodes, offerings, and what's coming up inside the temple next. And if this episode moves something within you, share it with a friend who's ready. I'll see you in the next episode. Come home to the temple within.